Chair Culp.
Here.
Vice Chair Schachner. Representative Rohrcast. Representative Stuck. Senator Tiffany. Nancy Dressel.
Here.
Stephen Dykstra. Here. Donna Haight-Menick. Here. Ann Malone. Here. Brenda Warren. Here. Michael Weber.
We'll forego approval of the minutes until we do have a quorum. As everyone is aware in the building, there are a lot of activities. There's an extraordinary session today. That's why you see the legislative members are likely in caucus, and we will hopefully be rounding them up and bring them in to have a quorum at some time. But there are a lot of people that will be probably coming in and out. This will be a relatively short meeting as well, but legislators must be present to vote as well. And I wanted to also acknowledge the email exchanges that have been going on between various groups here, and just say that I was not, I didn't see all of them, but I understand that there were some fairly pointed emails going back and forth, and it is not my intention to take up those debates this morning and to continue that discussion. That is to take a vote and to discuss the bills, the two bills that we have and the three recommendations, and then to have a up or down vote. So I would encourage the committee members to stay focused on that and actually request that they stay focused on those bills and recommendations and have any last words before the vote. This will complete our work for the day and for the study committee. But that obviously doesn't mean that we are done talking about dyslexia in this state. I think there are ample opportunities for us to continue that dialogue outside of the parameters of this meeting. I do see that we now have a quorum. Thank you, Representative Rohrcast, for, oh, no worries. You were here in this room until after midnight, I believe. So, so we have the ability to approve the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve minutes?
So moved.
Second? With no objections, approval of minutes is ordered. And then I will have Legislative Council describe the process after we complete the bills and the changes made at the committee's direction in our last meeting. So if, Jessica, if you could please do that, I would appreciate it.
Definitely. Good morning. So I am going to just briefly describe the process that the bills will go through after this committee concludes. As you're aware, this committee was appointed by the Joint Legislative Council, and the committee's vote today will constitute a legislative recommendation to the Joint Legislative Council, which is a statutory joint committee of the legislature comprised of 22 members, including the leadership of both houses. So the draft legislation is reported to JLC, which then votes on whether to introduce that legislation. If it is introduced, a bill from a committee such as ours will go through the legislative process, through standing committees, where it can be amended, the public can participate in hearings, and the committee can vote to send it to the full body like any other bill. Often legislation introduced by the Joint Legislative Council is relatively successful compared to other legislation because of all the procedure that we've gone through to create these bills. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julia to describe the changes that the committee asked for in the first bill regarding the guidebook on dyslexia.
There are several changes that the committee requested to the draft guidebook legislation. The first would be replacing the term dyslexia and struggling readers with the terms dyslexia and related conditions throughout the bill. The second is the creation of a definition for dyslexia for the purposes of the guidebook only. The third change is a language change relating to the contents that are required to be in the guidebook. It was requested by committee members that that language was modified slightly to match the language in a PowerPoint that ECS set forth before the committee. The fourth change in the guidebook legislation is that there is a prohibition added that prohibits any member of the advisory council from having a financial interest in either a product that is designed to identify dyslexia or a related condition, or a program that provides training on dyslexia or a related condition. The fifth change that the members requested to the guidebook legislation relates to the categories of members that were required to be on the advisory council. Specifically, the categories of members were deleted, and instead, IDA and WSRA each submit a list of 8 names that DPI must appoint to the advisory council. And DPI does have the power to identify an individual in either of those lists as disqualified for having a financial interest. In that instance, DPI must allow the organization, IDA or WSRA, to submit another name to DPI. I'm happy to take any questions about changes that were made that were requested by the committee. And if none, I will turn it back to the chair.
I believe Ann Malone has a question.
The question is, when did the training program part get added and by whom? The part that objects to anyone who's part of a training program serving on the writing committee.
Oh. So the corrections, or excuse me, the modifications to the guidebook were taken directly from members after viewing WisconsinEye footage of the committee. So I cannot name a person that specifically set forth the piece about a prohibition against someone that has a financial interest in a, pardon?
Representative Stuck.
My generous colleague here is indicating that it was Representative Stuck who set forth that recommendation.
And she's not here to discuss it. If you're part of a training program, you may or may not have any financial interest. If you're not paid, if you're a mentor. So would that eliminate someone who's, say, from Children's Dyslexia Center who's not paid, serving on a not paid person who's still affiliated with a training program? Would that eliminate
the specific language of the bill prohibits a person from having a financial interest in what we were just speaking of. So it would appear that if the person did not have a financial interest, meaning they were not paid in any way by the organization or business, that wouldn't prohibit that person. But ultimately, the interpretation, I think, would be, if it were challenged, I think that, pardon?
DPI.
I think that DPI would be the ultimate kind of decision maker as to whether the financial interest was in breach kind of the provisions of the bill. But again, if they're not being paid, it would be hard for them to argue that this language would prohibit it.
If I can just insert, I would have seen that as someone who is selling, who is putting together and selling curriculum as contrasted with, a person that is in the trenches doing the work. But that was what I took away from that and why we agreed that would be a, something that we could add. But I suppose that does leave things open. We do, of course, have the opportunity when this turns into a bill and goes before the legislative committee, the standing committee, to make arguments and to more clearly define that piece. And that is something that we will definitely want to keep in mind as we move through the process after this. Stephen, go ahead.
To raise some more concerns about that, the phrase financial interest is different than I imagined what you did too, that we're talking about people who own a product, it's their property, they're selling it, they're promoting it, they have kind of a large...
They're looking at doing it on a statewide level
a large
and
corporate profit motive. That's very different than somebody who gets $20 an hour as a tutor or is paid occasionally to come give a guest lecture. The other point that I would make about this is the way it is written now is you cannot be making money from the treatment or training of dyslexia and be on the committee. You can be making a lot of money from discouraging the treatment and training of dyslexia and still be on the committee.
There certainly is that.
So
that back
there
and
is
forth,
an inequity there. There are a number of people who tour the country saying that dyslexia doesn't exist and we should ignore it. Any of them could be on the committee. You could,
Which is why when this goes through the standard legislative process, I would be there, and hopefully the rest of you will be as well, to make sure that there is clear definition here to that. So,
in that interest, would we be better off striking that section completely, voting on it without that in there, and relying on the committee to put it back in different language?
no, it's a good point. The challenge with that is that because this is the final meeting that we have planned for this, is that that nothing will get done, because it's not going to be, I don't think it's possible to amend that at this stage of the game.
It's a pretty clean amendment. We're just talking about striking one whole thing.
Did Ledge Council want to weigh in on that?
So in terms of the time management, that's the chair's discretion. And in terms of amendments that we are capable of handling without the benefit of the drafting bureau, which is definitely tied up today, striking something would be within the realm of something we could just do and then you could vote on today.
Okay. Now, Representative Stuck, thanks for joining us. Appreciate that. This was the insertion that you had asked for, and that I think in our conversation we understood what you were saying. Would you mind expanding on what you had in mind with regards to that?
Well, I think the biggest thing is what I heard concerns from parents and from other stakeholders, educators, is that there's a lot of money to be made in this field, right? I mean, certainly we heard from many, many parents who are struggling, they're desperate to help their children and to figure out what to do. And what we don't want to happen are people who are trying to make money selling a product to be swaying policy when it comes to really serving their families. So we don't want them on there pushing a specific product or way of doing things that really is more about a bottom line and selling a product than really truly looking at what's best, what really helps these students, and what serves them.
So your thought was a product, not a service, in the sense of having a tutor that is working for whatever dollars per hour they are working for. That wasn't the concern as much as the curriculum product, if you will.
Well, I think the product was the main thing, but I think certainly, I'd be willing to look at how do we address those that also offer services that maybe are marketed as being for people with dyslexia, but maybe there's not research or anything behind what they're doing. I mean, I would be willing to look at how, anybody who is trying to purely do it from a business perspective, how we can limit their involvement just to ensure that it's really about serving the students and not about financial gain.
And I share your concerns, Representative Stuck, relative to that. We are looking at, I'm trying to make a decision here as to what we're going to do right now. Ann Malone, go ahead.
Thank you. So if that verbiage is left in, then I needed it to be expanded to the other side of the table as well. The WSRA
The
also
financial
has to
interest
be,
is on either side, so.
well, then no paid member of the WSRA should be able to serve either.
Which is why I think, and I agree with what you're saying, what I think the best way forward is to put the clarification to this, to take an up or down vote on the bill as it is and have the clarification happen at the standard legislative process.
I would still like it all struck. I think it's,
We can always put it back in.
we could put it back in if we need to, but I'd like it struck today. It gives DPI way too much power to eliminate any of the people who are extremely knowledgeable, because we're all working in some small way. I don't have a product that I'm selling, but, I make $6,000 a year, and I don't want that to stop me from serving, or somebody else who's making
may.
30.
Yes, go ahead.
If I may, Ann Malone would be forbidden because she gets $6,000 a year. I would be forbidden because I got $500 in a stipend for an honorarium at a conference last month. People who make $10 million a year saying dyslexia doesn't exist and have multiple homes around the country and drive Maseratis off that would not be forbidden because they don't make money selling a dyslexia product.
Good point.
It says a vendor, not, so this doesn't talk about educators paid by their organization.
It talks about training programs. I'm part of a training program.
So just to clarify, the language is that a person can't have a financial interest in a vendor of a product designed to identify dyslexia or a related condition, or a program that provides training on dyslexia or a related condition. And so I would agree with Julia's analysis that typically a financial interest in a vendor is not going to be interpreted by the appropriate authorities to include someone who is paid to tutor with, like, using that program.
Representative Stuck, a question for you, if
Yeah.
you don't mind. Would you vote against this bill if that provision were struck and it were brought up in a standard meeting, legislative meeting, after the session begins? And
Yeah.
you would? Okay.
Well, I mean, I guess
And I know I'm putting you on the
Yeah.
spot, but it was a great question that Legislative Counsel slipped over to me to ask you because they understand this process far better than I do, and I'm a little bit of a quandary as to which way to go here. So,
yeah, I mean, I guess I just don't know how anybody can argue that we want to make sure we have the right people at the table. You know, like we've just clarified, certainly I think just because you've done something doesn't mean you're going to be stopped from being a part of this. But what we want to do is, again, just make sure we have the right people at the table and making sure we are protecting families. So I find that concerning, and I think the point of the committee is still good. So I would like to see it going, to go forward. But at the same time, I think it's really important that we make sure we have the right people there.
Nancy.
I'm wondering if the committee would mind looking at page 3, lines 17 through 25 of the proposed legislation that describes what the outcome of this legislation would be in the guidebook. Because what I notice is that it talks about guidelines on screening processes and tools. It talks about a description of interventions and instructional strategies. So it speaks to a guidebook that includes multiple of these. So I personally don't have concerns about multiple people who have experience and expertise with multiple tools being able to participate in the conversation and share their research and evidence behind their tool in order to create a guidebook that includes multiple to support our parents and our teachers. This guidebook isn't directive. It is not saying that there is one vendor or one tool that needs to be used across the state of Wisconsin. So I'm not concerned that people have a financial interest in what they bring to the table because we aren't choosing one.
But we have said that this is for use for teachers as well as parents, right? So I mean, maybe it's not instructive, but we are guiding educators
With multiple options. And there are lots of free ones. And, I think one of the challenges is that because dyslexia is not said in many public schools, your only option is things that cost money on a free market to meet those needs. And that situation is created because we aren't allowed to address these challenges in the system within a public school. So there's no way to get around the fact that there are products involved in this process. And I look at this as creating a guidebook that references multiple, that people who use the guidebook can make informed decisions from that. No one's being directed to purchase anything or do anything. So I completely understand your concern, and if there was anything directive about this, I think it would be absolutely imperative that all interests in financial gain were well vetted and well known. But because it's a guidebook that is simply sharing multiple options, I don't feel that's as necessary. And I think it's more important to facilitate a balanced discussion on this topic, to have guidance that goes out to parents that is useful, which unfortunately, because of our situation at this point, requires people who are paid to do their job and paid to train people. And, I mean, that's a result of our system, not because of how people would prefer the system to be.
Go ahead, Brenda.
I agree with Nancy, and I'm also on to echo what Steve said. This implies that there are people that are working with products and with students with dyslexia, that they're the only ones with financial gain. And I think right now, as the guidebook is, half of the committee is going to come from the State Reading Association, and there's nothing in here to protect the committee from having people on the committee that are going to push a product that they believe in that's not necessarily for children with dyslexia, which is why we're here. And I think if this kind of language is going to be included, it needs to be balanced on both sides of the coin.
And I will just say that the process here kind of, we got off our script, which doesn't matter because it's more about putting out a good product than a good bill product, if you will, than just the process. But because we are already in a discussion, I was going to have every member speak for 2 minutes about the bill, and we obviously have something that we need to resolve, but I do need to call up WSRA as well, because we had given them the opportunity to have their 2 minutes as well, and then to not have a vote. But if Deb Cromer, if you would like to come up and just take a seat at anywhere you choose, either in front, or I don't mind if you join us back behind the dais either. But that is, I think, the appropriate thing to do at this point. So, Steve, did you have something to say, or you?
I can't emphasize enough that the way that I am very uncomfortable leaving this language in and counting on somebody fixing it later. And it can't stay in the way it is because it only affects one side of this debate. Many tutors work privately, therefore they are vendors of their services. For instance, Mark Seidenberg, who spoke to us, not that he would join the committee, he owns and sells a book that covers this topic, that believes in dyslexia. He would not be allowed to. Donna Scanlon, who I don't expect to be on the committee either, sells a product, but it is counter to dyslexia, therefore she could be on the committee. We're creating an inequity here that is absolutely one-sided. And I think you have to understand that a lot of the tutors, and I do a lot of speaking for free. I occasionally get paid. I do that on my own. Technically, I'm a vendor of that service. I could not join the committee. There's subtleties in the way this is written, and I think the best solution to this is to just strike the language and work something out in a committee. We've been told by legislative counsel we can strike the language today. That's within our ability. We can't rewrite the language today, but we can strike it and rewrite it in committee. If we don't strike it and count on the committee to rewrite it, I know enough about how this process, maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. And then the only people we can put on this committee, from our side would be parents.
Representative Rourke, do you have something to add?
Well, I do agree with Representative Stuck and, about the concern. I guess I side with Steve's comments. I think that we should strike the language today and work on a better, clearer definition of what financial interest is. I mean, in certain contract law, there's material versus non-material. I mean, I know that may not, but there's certain words that could be used, and we obviously we can't get into that level of probably change today, according to Ledge Council. So I would I would be supportive of striking the language, referencing in the notes that maybe if we can do that, that this needs to be looked at as when we put the bill forward. And believe me, I do agree with the concern. I see both sides of it, and I think that we need to move this forward. So let's move it forward, strike the language, and then we will deal with it later.
I think that's good
But
advice.
I understand there's another side to that.
Deb, do you have anything that you want to share just from your thoughts here for the minute or two?
Well, at WSRA, we do not promote products. That is part of our beliefs, that we do not promote products.
Yep. Representative Stuck, go ahead.
Well, I mean, if she wants to finish first. And my question is maybe separate than what she's talking about.
Oh,
so.
Yeah, we're done.
Okay. Well, I guess my question is there any requirement for members of committees created like this and other committees to disclose any conflicts of interest they may have in terms of, financial gain that they're related to in other committees? Is there any requirements like that?
I see Ledge Council communicating between themselves, and we'll let them weigh in on that, potentially.
I don't think I have a definitive answer on that. I think that this is a pretty unusual type of committee to be created in statutes, to have mainly public members.
Interesting. We were going to take 2 minutes to talk about, for each person to talk about the process in the bill. I'm trying to decide if that makes the most sense or if we've talked about it to the extent that we need to. But I believe that in keeping my word on that, we will do that. And then what we will do is we will take a vote on striking that piece of it. That's an amendment we can take. And hopefully, if that doesn't pass, then there's always the opportunity to take a vote on the original. So because I just think that's the way to move forward. So let's let those of you all take a minute or two to discuss what you have liked about the process, not liked about this, or this bill, I should say, not the process. Goodness, forgive me, retract that, not the process. We've been talking about process. Let's talk about the bill. And just open that up for a bit. And if they're not going to put any of you on the spot, so if you don't have anything to say and you're ready to take the vote, I'm fine as well. I
hate to always be the guy, but I want to just share with everybody that at the last meeting I volunteered to draft something responding to the concerns about many definitions of dyslexia which allegedly contradicted each other and made the subject difficult. I wrote something, but it was not what I had promised to write. It was not distributed, and I understand why. I just want to share my concern that the reason I couldn't write it was because I reached out to the WSRA on multiple occasions and asked them to share the definitions of dyslexia.
It was my intention to keep this to comments related to this bill specifically.
The bill requires us to serve together on a committee, and I am concerned that in the smallest way that we were asked to work together, just tell us what worries you, nobody would respond.
Maybe you will have a better chair, and I'm not trying to be flip. I'm just saying that there is it's been challenging all the way around, and I respect that. Is there go ahead next? Anyone else want to weigh in? Go ahead.
I wasn't at the last meeting because I was at the International Dyslexia Association Conference. I think Julia, brought up my concern, but I just wanted to reiterate it again. There's a requirement in the bill for school districts that have a website that they're required to post a link to the guidebook and related conditions. And I don't have a problem necessarily with that requirement, but I have a concern that there are, because our schools and teachers and educators in general don't have a very good knowledge base of what dyslexia is and how to instruct it in a way that helps children with dyslexia succeed to learn how to read. Just posting the guidebook is not going to change practice automatically. And I just am, and I don't think that this is something that gets necessarily put into a bill, but something that I think needs to occur alongside of the development of the guidebook and the hiring of the dyslexia specialists at the DPI level, is concerted efforts to help school districts prepare for the time when this guidebook goes live on their website, because without that preparation, they have a guidebook on their website, but they don't have the knowledge base and the teachers who have the knowledge base to be able to address what's in the guidebook as best practice for students with dyslexia.
What I'm hearing you say is there's a lot more work left to be done
Yes.
relative to this, and I would concur with that. Do I have a motion to amend the bill or? Yes, go ahead. Absolutely. I didn't want to cut it off. I just didn't see hands going up, so.
I wear multiple hats in this conversation. As a parent, when I looked at the scope of our committee and thought about the experience that we went through with my child, I found myself disappointed that we maybe didn't get to the scope of this, and that there wasn't teeth to support a parent in a process. But I also am an educator and know the difficulties of working in education. Yesterday I got to eat a cheese stick for lunch and had one bathroom break. And so I know how hard our teachers are working and trying to learn everything they can to support every student. And so when I look at it through that lens, I found myself feeling very hopeful about a guidebook and a dyslexia specialist to support improvement in learning for all students. And I went back to one of our first meetings. I made the comment that improvement can't be mandated or legislated. And so I just want to remind all of us that improvement in education doesn't come from a bill. It comes from individual teachers engaging in continuous growth and using assessment data to guide and monitor changes in their instruction. And it comes from teams of people, teachers, parents, medical professionals, working together to continually review systems in schools and the data in order to guide and monitor continuous growth in schools. Many schools right now are trying to live to the belief of all means all, that we support all students in learning to the best of their ability, and that word all means all. So I see this process as an invitation to improving learning in every classroom for all students by beginning to use the term dyslexia and by beginning to learn about the science of reading and by beginning to engage at times in very challenging conversations with a commitment to collaboration between parents and educators and medical professionals and brain scientists and tutors and students. Their voice needs to be at the table. But most of all, I think it's an invitation to start saying the word dyslexia. There were multiple times during testimony that I heard concerns about using the word dyslexia and the negative impact it could have on a child and their confidence. I also heard it referred to as a privilege, that we were privileging some students above others. And as a person with dyslexia myself, with a child with dyslexia, I will tell you that there's nothing more powerful than using the word, because it creates acceptance for who you are as an individual and what your strengths and struggles are. So I am very hopeful about this legislation, about a guidebook and a dyslexia specialist, and its ability to support the processes and conversations that initiate real change, because change and improvement truly can't be legislated or mandated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have go ahead, Deb.
Yes, I'd just like to echo what Nancy said. I think that it is extremely important in this state and across this country for teachers to have access to professional learning that enables them to make wise decisions for all children. And all does mean all, and WSRA certainly believes that. I do want to say that we at WSRA followed the process as we understood it of the study committee, and we submitted to Representative Culp and Senator Schachner our positions after our board met, as I said we would at the last meeting. Our positions are unchanged in terms of the definition and our position on the dyslexia specialist. We sent those positions again with extensive explanation of why we take those positions, and we've also presented testimony on a number of occasions. So we were trying to follow the procedures as outlined in this committee, and that's how we proceeded.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to strike or to amend the bill by striking
Motion that we strike,
the financial interest?
thank you, the financial interest and the training, that you can't be part of a training program.
Is that a clear motion to you, Legislative Counsel?
Reword
I'll
it for me.
just clarify that on page 4, we're deleting lines 6 from no member through line 10.
I'll second.
So we have a first and a second, and is that time for the roll call, right? Let's have the clerk take the roll call on that.
Chair Culp,
Yes.
Senator Schachner, Representative Rohrcast,
Aye.
Representative Stuck,
No.
Senator Tiffany, Nancy Dressel,
Yes.
Stephen Dykstra,
Yes.
Donna Hetmanik,
Yes.
Ann Malone,
Yes.
Brenda Warren,
Yes.
and Michael Weber.
So the motion passes,
Yes.
and
Then if you want to have a motion to send this to the Joint Legislative Council as amended.
excellent. I would entertain a motion to send this to the Joint Legislative Council as amended, which is the next step in the process.
Will there be a moment for discussion? I have one clarifying question just for the public about this.
Yes, go ahead.
The language of the bills, of both bills, includes sections referred to as statutory and non-statutory language. And for people who are not accustomed to legislation, that can be a little alarming, because to the layperson, it may appear that the statutory sections are required and the non-statutory sections are optional. That's the kind of thing somebody might read into this. And if we could just get some assurance for anybody watching this, that the non-statutory language has all the weight of law that the statutory sections do.
Ledge Counsel, you were listening, Julia, you were listening to that, and I was distracted momentarily. Could you weigh in on that?
That is accurate. So the non-statutory provisions are not going to be in the statute books. They're going to be in the language of the act, should it become an act and it becomes law. But they do have the force and effect of law. They just would not be found in the statutory books. You would have to turn to the text of the act in order to find those provisions.
I just wanted to clarify that, because for people who are not familiar with legislative drafting and how these things are made into law, it can appear that the statutory language has greater weight or more impact than the non-statutory. And I just wanted to make that clear for people who might be watching.
So, do we have a motion to pass this bill as amended and send it to the Legislative
moved.
Council? Stephen
Second.
Dykstra. Second, Nancy Dressel. Clerk, call the roll if you would.
Chair Culp,
Aye.
Senator Schachner, Representative Rohrcast,
Aye.
Representative Stuck,
Aye.
Senator Tiffany, Nancy Dressel,
Aye.
Stephen Dykstra,
Aye.
Donna Hetmanik,
Aye.
Ann Malone,
Aye.
Brenda Warren,
Aye.
Michael Weber.
We move on to the next bill, the Dyslexia Specialist Bill, and I will have Jessica from Ledge Council describe that bill for us.
So this is LRB 0368/P1. And at our last meeting of this committee, the consensus was to make some changes I'll describe quickly that are incorporated in the draft we have today. So there were some changes to the terminology. Reading difficulties and dyslexia was replaced with dyslexia and related conditions. Evidence-based was replaced with scientifically based. And the words adoption of were deleted in, let me find the spot to just clarify what that is. The second page. Well, we deleted the words adoption of. Do you remember what that was about?
That's why you can't find them, because they've been deleted.
I know. Well, the committee members suggested deleting the words adoption of, so they're gone. And instruction programs was replaced with instructional practices and strategies. Then some changes were made to the requirements for the qualifications for the dyslexia specialist that will be hired under this bill in DPI beginning in the 2019 to 20 school year and funded with $95,000 per year. So this specialist under this version of the bill must have 5 years instead of 3 years of experience in screening, identifying, and treating dyslexia and related conditions. This dyslexia specialist also, to be qualified, needs to have certification as one of the following: Fellow of the Academy of Orton-Gillingham Practitioners and Educators, certification by the Academic Language Therapy Association in specific categories, or certification by the Center for Effective Reading Instruction as a structured literacy dyslexia interventionist or a structured literacy dyslexia specialist. So those changes are all in this draft.
Thank you. Representative Stuck.
Can you just clarify for me that it does not require in here that the specialists actually have experience in the classroom instructing students?
So it does not use those words to describe the experience the person needs to have. They need to have experience in screening, identifying, and treating dyslexia and related conditions. They also have to be a dyslexia therapist, a dyslexia training specialist, a psychologist or school psychologist, or an SLP. So if they are an SLP or a school psychologist, they have specific licensure requirements under the statutes, and I did delve into what those are. They don't have requirements for classroom experience, and neither would a dyslexia therapist or training specialist.
So we could potentially have someone who's never been in a classroom telling teachers how they should be teaching in the classroom?
The requirements for the qualification, for the qualified individuals for the position don't include classroom experience. The job of the person is to provide schools with information, technical assistance, and support related to dyslexia and related conditions, and to provide schools with information and support about addressing those needs of pupils who have those conditions, and increase professional awareness in schools and instructional competencies of teachers to meet those needs.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
I would just mention that as an educator, that's not concerning to me, simply because I get guidance from people who work, As an educator, that lack of classroom experience for this position is not concerning to me. As an educator, I learn from other professionals in the field and outside of the field who their expertise is working with students one-on-one, but I can take their expertise and apply it to my work with large groups. And in particular, I need their expertise. A person in a classroom who's addressing the needs of 30 to 125 students every day doesn't have the opportunity to develop the expertise that is needed in this position. So we need people to collaborate from people who work with people one-on-one to people who work with large groups of people to find the best solutions. So I don't find it concerning at all that this position doesn't require classroom experience, and that's speaking from a person who would be benefiting from them to work with students.
Go ahead, Deborah. And if you don't mind, as you think about your comments, I didn't ask you how your organization would have voted on the last piece, so on the guidebook piece. And you don't have to answer that right away. You can think about that. But at some point, I had told Kathy Champeau that I would allow you to say which way you would vote, and so that it could be, on the record. But go ahead. You were.
I just wanted to concur with what Representative Stuck said. I do believe that having classroom experience would be not just beneficial, but critically important to informing someone in the position of dyslexia specialist. Not just knowledge of reading, but also knowledge of children and their development and what the expectations are in the classroom as children proceed through the educational system. I think there is nothing that substitutes for classroom experience. The other thing I have is a question. I want to make sure that I understand it correctly, that the people who are eligible for this position, that they would have at least a bachelor's degree, because I'm not clear on that as far as the dyslexia specialist that is Orton Society trained, that they would be in a position, again, to be working with teachers who are required to have a bachelor's degree, that they could be appointed to that position and have very little training other than the dyslexia training.
Go ahead, Ann.
The people who are trained by ALTA or SIRI, which is IDA, all have to have a bachelor's degree before we train them. And how many reading teachers or reading interventionists have worked in the classroom?
Legislative Counsel has some input here that I would like to have her share.
I can only share that the bill doesn't define what the requirements and qualifications are to become a dyslexia therapist or a dyslexia training specialist. Since it does require that the person have qualifications that are set by private organizations, those are not defined by the state.
Go ahead.
In line 7, when it refers to licensed by the department, is that referring to a education certification and licensure through the Wisconsin Department of Instruction, I'm assuming?
Correct.
So I believe every person who receives a teaching license has to have a bachelor's degree, and we would also assume experience in a school.
And just to clarify, that's not that you don't have to have licensure from the department to be qualified under this provision. You have to be one of these things, not all of them.
Correct.
So,
but there's some sort of licensure from the DPI, which infers a minimum of a bachelor's degree, and
there's no requirement that they have a license from a DPI.
So line 7, where it says licensed by department?
That'd be one of the things they can be.
It's not
The
all
person
of these.
can be, the person can qualify under this provision by being either a dyslexia therapist, which is a totally privately defined thing, a dyslexia training specialist, which is a totally privately defined thing, absent any certification by the state, a psychologist or private practice school psychologist, which is licensed by the state, a school psychologist licensed by the Department of Public Instruction, a speech and language pathologist licensed by the state, or one that receives a licensure through DPI. So those are or.
May I ask another question? The qualifications that are listed, starting on page 3 and lines 21, would those be describing a dyslexia therapist or dyslexia training specialist?
That is going to not be defined by this language. It's, the committee's decision was to put the language that just says dyslexia therapist and dyslexia training specialist without defining it. And so this is a non-statutory provision at the bottom that talks about the qualifications that are set by, the certifications that are set up by private organizations. The reason that's in a non-statutory provision is that it's only going to apply to the first hire, because the state can't control whether that private organization continues to exist or what their certification is titled over time. And so it's defined privately.
Just, if I may, to the question of classroom experience, and I went through some of this last time, but I think it's important to recognize how widespread this is. I give training to physicians. I'm not a physician. I was called to a state conference of juvenile court judges and provided training to them. I'm a law. I'm not a judge, and I'm not an attorney. Some of the best training I ever got was from an FBI agent who by training was an accountant. I train teachers. I train police officers. I get training from a wide variety of people. That's what professions do.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Deb.
Yes, I just want to say that I, too, learn from other professionals, but we're talking about a position that will be affecting children in schools. And I do believe that teaching experience should be a requirement. Reading teachers and reading specialists are required to have a teaching license, and the certification for both of those is in addition to classroom experience. And so that provides a context in which to provide instruction in reading. And I believe that's vitally important.
If I may.
Go ahead, as long as it's focused on the bill and not,
Position, we should remember, is a position set up at the state to give advice to districts that want it, to give guidance to teachers and districts that elect it, that they aren't going to have the power to mandate anything. This doesn't change the local control nature of state education. This simply provides them with a resource. So we don't have to be worried that they're going to come insert themselves into the classroom and tell the teacher what they have to do.
That's a good point. We had also talked about giving 2 minutes apiece to discuss this. Is that, again, if you care to, you may. If not, we will go to a motion and a vote fairly soon. I would like to hear from the WSRA. I think your organization was pretty specific that it would be a no on this. Again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just, if you don't mind sharing what your thoughts are, or your organization's thoughts.
Okay, I just want to point of clarification. Are you talking about the dyslexia specialist, or are we going back to the?
I don't know that you had necessarily weighed in on the guidebook, so if you don't mind on that first.
Right, we are certainly in favor of the guidebook, but we are not in favor of including a definition, but you've already voted on that. As far as the dyslexia specialist, no, we are not in favor of creating a dyslexia specialist. We believe that there are other specialists at DPI already, and we've named those in the past. And we believe that we need to make sure that those people are consulted and able to do their job.
Anyone else on this bill specifically before I ask for a motion and a vote? Go ahead, Ann.
I'd like to consider striking lines 5 through 8 and a discussion thereof, to take out the school psychologist and the SLP. I was a speech and language pathologist, and I knew nothing about dyslexia. It worries me immensely that DPI could hire someone as our dyslexia specialist who has no background or information about dyslexia. I didn't realize it was an or. My mistake.
Go ahead.
If I understand from the language, anybody hired under one of those licenses would still have to be certified by one of the national organizations.
Right.
Is that correct?
Is that, Legislative Counsel, you want to weigh in on that?
For the first person who will fill the position under the non-statutory provisions, they have to, in addition, have the qualifications listed here at the end of page 3, which are the national organizations.
Okay, then I remove my request. Thank you.
You just made my life a lot more simple as well.
Good question.
Any other thoughts on that before I ask for a motion? Go ahead, Representative Stock.
Well, I would just like to say, certainly I can see value in this position just from the fact that we've heard, I think, quite a divide between parents and teachers for some reason. I mean, there seems to be a real disconnect there, where parents feel like they're not getting what they need, and educators certainly seem to not feel like people understanding how hard they're working and what they're doing. So there seems to be a real disconnect, and I think there could be value in a position like this to help figure out what that is. I've been trying to put my finger on that this whole time, and I think there's potential for this position to help with that. Unfortunately, I do think classroom experience should be a requirement as a substitute teacher, as a licensed substitute teacher when I'm in the classroom. I mean, that's just not something you can just know without being in there, understanding what it's like. And I think you need to know that if you're going to be helping to give recommendations to teachers about how to help these students. So I think that is something that really should be a requirement. So I don't know I can support it without a requirement like that, but I think it's unfortunate because I do think there could be potential that this could be a positive role.
And of course, I'll remind everyone that this is going to have another day in the open at some point in the future. So,
So do you recognize the motion? She wanted to remove the.
Go ahead, Dr. Warren.
I'd like to speak just to the concern of having classroom experience. And I think I look at this position as being a content expert as opposed to a pedagogy expert. And not that the person won't have pedagogy, but this person isn't going to be swooping in, telling districts what to do, and then swooping out. This is content knowledge that they're providing for the district. In speaking to people that have been doing this work with school districts all across the country, if you provide foundational knowledge to teachers, teachers will know what to do with that knowledge because they have strong and good pedagogy. And so I think for me, it's more about making sure we have a very well qualified expert who's an expert in dyslexia, who can provide that content knowledge to teachers to enhance what they're already doing, because a lot of what they're already doing is excellent teaching. It's not like they're coming in and completely changing everything. There are just pieces that are not included in most curricula across the state that are necessary pieces, especially for students with dyslexia.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to pass this bill without any amendments?
So moved.
Stephen Dykstra,
Second that motion?
second, Donna Hetmanick. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Chair Culp,
Aye.
Senator Schachner, Representative Rohrkast,
Aye.
Representative Stuck,
No.
Senator Tiffany, Nancy Dressel,
Aye.
Stephen Dykstra,
Aye.
Donna Hickmanick, Ann Malone,
Aye.
Brenda Warren,
Aye.
Michael Weber.
We are almost back on time. My agenda says 11 o'clock. Chair Culp will be reminding the committee that nothing has changed with the recommendations, the 3 recommendations that we had. Are there any comments or discussion on those recommendations? They were dealing with licensure. We could go through them and over them, but if the committee is prepared to take the vote, I certainly don't have any.
And it can be voted on all as a piece or?
Right, we could vote on them all together. If there's no comments and no changes, no discussion, we could lump all 3 of them together and take one singular vote. Go ahead, Dr. Warren.
I just have a question on what happens with these and how, and if they get attached to the bills or how they get introduced after today.
You want to address that, Jessica or Julia?
These are included in a report that Julia and I will make to the Joint Legislative Council along with Chair Culp and Vice Chair Schachner when they hold that meeting in February or March. And so it goes with our final report of the committee's proceedings. They are not attached to the bills. They are not bills. They will not go into the legislative process. They are legislative recommendations.
So can they become bills if the legislative committee decides to create a bill?
They're not drafted as bills, so they would have to be, they could be put in as drafting instructions if
Okay,
someone
yeah.
decided, I want to work on this. But they are worded in a pretty general way. So as far as specifics of how someone would take that up, it would be up to the legislators who decide to move forward with it.
Okay, so they could decide to put forth a request to turn this into a bill of some sort. And then it would
Just
go
as an
through
example, if a member of this committee who's an elected official decided that they want to, create a bill out of this, they would be able to proceed with the Legislative Reference Bureau, make a drafting request, and work with them on, or work as a group on introducing something in their capacity as a legislator.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I think the reason that wasn't done is because some of these changes were relatively recent, and the chance of changing the ground again was difficult, so, or, would not have happened or been plausible. So that is why, but I think the committee felt as though the recommendations were strong enough to send through as a message. So, yes, go ahead, Dr. Nancy Dressel, go ahead.
The language pertaining to the alternative licensure, I had asked some questions at the last meeting about what types of licensure the Fort test was required for. Initially, when that legislation was passed in 2014, there was a K-5 licensure. It was also required for SPED and for reading specialists. Our licensure categories are now different. And so I had asked for clarification on which licensures currently the Fort is required for, because this language refers to, it seems to refer to all licensure, and I don't know that the Fort actually applies to all licensure. So I was wondering if that clarification was able to be obtained.
Are you understanding what she's
It is general language. If it were a bill draft, we would be thinking about, okay, do we want to specify to whom exactly this Fort test requirement should apply? But since it is not in the format of changing the law, it isn't drafted in that type of specific technical language. So it's a recommendation that this be reviewed by the individuals in the best position to make that translation, if you will, into legalese for the statutes, and I think DPI would probably have some insight into those requirements and interpretation of the statutes. It is worded generally.
Any other discussion on the bills, or the recommendations, pardon me, the three? I think what we'll do is put them all together, and I'll entertain a motion to pass these on to the next level. Representative Rohrcast?
Motion, yeah.
Yep, motion, go ahead. Yep, sorry about that. You were up way late last night. I was watching you. I was watching you way late last night, so I knew what you wanted to do, but I didn't know how to get there from here in my head, so. Second motion for the recommendations?
Second.
Go ahead, we had two there. Let's take Dr. Warren. And if the clerk could call the roll on the vote.
Chair Culp,
Aye.
Senator Schachner, Representative Rohrcast,
Aye.
Representative Stuck,
Aye.
Senator Tiffany, Nancy Dressel,
Aye.
Steve Dykstra,
Aye.
Donna Hitmanick,
Aye.
Ann Malone,
Aye.
Brenda Warren, Michael Weber.
That passed unanimously, correct?
Yes.
Without exception, excellent. Is there any other business that we should be entertaining here for this? Yes, go ahead.
I just want to say that even though we don't have a vote, WSRA concurs with all of these recommendations for those three.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate very much your organization and its ability to be flexible and generous. And really, this is for all of the committee members. It has been a process that I've not done before, so it has been a stretching experience for me, shall we say, and I think in a good way. So I want to thank each of you as committee members for dedicating the time and the energy that it takes. As legislators, it's our job to come to the building here. And for all of you who served, I know that you did it because you had a passion for this. And I respect that, and I think that's just something that really is necessary to be pointed out, that I thank you, and I think that the people of the state of Wisconsin, and especially kids possibly struggling with dyslexia or other related reading disorders or difficulties, can respect that as well. So on behalf of all of those, I wanted to say thank you for your participation, for your attendance, for your input, for your insights. My guess is that the job isn't done with dyslexia. In fact, I know it's not. I think that work will continue on that. But I wanted to say thank you personally. So appreciate all of that. Is there anything else? I do want to I was stalling for time a little bit because I think that we have two senators that may want to actually register a vote on these. And Legislative Counsel informed me that I can only hold the roll open until the end of the meeting. So after I strike this little wooden mallet on this piece, they can no longer do that. Now, I don't want to hold it open all day for them, but I'm willing to entertain some thoughts. And Representative Rourke, you have something.
Thank you, Representative Culp. I just want to make a few comments as well. As a legislator coming into this study committee, I really knew very little about this issue, so I would echo Representative Culp's comments in thanking everybody that's on the study committee, thanking everybody that testified, that sent in information. It was very educational to me as a legislator to understand this issue better. I just have a couple of observations. I think everybody agrees that our goal is to improve reading here in the state, but obviously as we went through this process, there was different views as to maybe how best to do that, particularly as it relates to this issue of dyslexia. I think that we made progress in what we passed, but we also made progress in getting some of those differences out. Hopefully that can continue. I would make that request to both parties that are dealing with this issue. Continue to work together, continue to try to find common ground, express your views, express and work together. This is not uncommon, I've learned, in the legislative process. You can have the same goals, but you have different ways possibly of getting there. And I think that where we can bog down is if we don't look for points of agreement, don't look for points of where we can both improve or make progress, and let's continue to do that. So that would be my request to the parties. I'm happy to work with any of the organizations to continue to do this. My goal is to just improve reading in the state of Wisconsin. If we can do that, I think we've made progress. Obviously, there's more work to be, there's always going to be work to be done. We're never going to fully maybe solve this issue, but we've got to keep working together on this. So again, thank you to everybody on the committee. I greatly appreciate your expertise. It's been extremely educational to me, so thank you.
Yes, I want to briefly just follow those comments. I was a little concerned during some of our discussion hearing things like our side, and because I don't think there really is our side of this. I think we all want children to do well. I think everybody's working incredibly hard to make that happen. As I mentioned, it's clear there's a disconnect and that families are out there feeling like they aren't getting the support that they need. I don't think it's because our teachers aren't working incredibly hard. I don't think it's that they don't care. I don't think it's that they're not trained. Like I said, I've been trying to put my finger on why we have that disconnect and figure that out. But again, I don't think there's any one side against another. I think we really all do want to serve our children. We want all of our children to have the resources they need. So hopefully what we did here will help a little bit. I think clearly there's a lot more work to do, though. So hopefully the discussion will continue from here.
Thank you very much for that. And I see we have Senator Schottner arrived just before I actually do adjourn. My intention was in consultation with Legislative Counsel, since there's nothing in statute that says that we have the need to, no ability to take a vote after the roll, or I'm not sure how the process works there, but it's different than the normal. But I do see Senator Tiffany arriving as well. So you all came just in time for the vote and for the gavel then to come down. So If you would like to share some remarks, Senator Schottner, you're looking.
Up or down?
It is, how's that?
I'm happy to describe the amendment and request votes on each individual thing to clarify.
Yes, if you don't mind doing that.
So that it
and
can
then-
be in
yeah.
public in
Yep.
session. So the first vote that we took was to amend the, well, actually, the first vote we took was to approve the October meeting minutes. Do you have any strong feelings about that? Okay. Would you like to vote then on amending the guidebook draft by deleting the financial interest portion on page 4, lines 6 through 10? The committee decided by a majority vote to delete those provisions and then to recommend the bill as amended.
I vote no.
No on the amendment, no on the bill, or both?
I vote no on the amendment for the financial interest. In the best interest of children, having financial interest is not, in my opinion, the best thing.
Is there an opportunity to recount some of the debate about that so we can explain how we got there?
Yeah, sounds terrible.
So the chair is really in charge of, proceeding as he sees fit right now. There has been a request down the line for committee members to go into the discussion that took place around that.
No, I would rather not at this point. We are at the point where, yeah. And did you get, I will
Senator
turn things back
Tiffany,
over to you.
do you have a vote regarding the amending of that bill to remove the requirement that committee members have no financial interest in a vendor of a training program? Yes, okay. And then for both of you, the vote to recommend the amended bill to the Joint Legislative Council.
Yes.
Okay. So actually, to ensure that I record the vote correctly, Senator Schottner, did you want to vote against removing the financial interest provision?
Yes.
And you wanted to vote for keeping it? Okay, for amending it. Thank you. I'm sorry, it's been a long night for all of us. I admit that I went home and watched the proceedings as well, because it's hard to turn off. Okay, so the next vote we had was to pass the second bill as a recommendation to the Joint Legislative Council, which was the bill requiring DPI to require a dyslexia specialist. Your votes?
I vote no.
Okay, Senator Tiffany, aye. Did you record my vote on the bill? Yes. I did. I recorded it as aye. Sending the amended bill to the Joint Legislative Council. Thank you. Okay. All right. And finally, we took one vote on all three recommendations to the Joint Legislative Council. Would you like to vote aye or no on sending the three recommendations to the Joint Legislative Council?
I vote aye. I vote aye.
Thank you.
All the votes have been tallied. Everything is good. I think I greatly, once again, appreciate all of your attendance, your efforts, and wish you the best. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.